welcome to Night Treks. The night is dark, so it's time for a tale. I'm Tom, your ghost host, and this is our strange journey into one story that is dark, strange, and true, but maybe not. We'll leave that for you to decide. Tonight's tale, Basin Road. I spent most of my childhood on Basin Road. It was just a dirt road when we moved there in the early 70s. Old Refuge Church on one end and Basin School on the other as it stretched for only about 5 miles. My grandparents had a farm just across the road from us, which was only about 100 yards from that school. There was a barn on their farm that had once, at one time, been Refuge Church before they built a new building. My grandfather had bought the old building and had it moved to his property to use as a barn. As kids, that was one of our favorite places to play. And during that play, we witnessed some unusual things at times. Shadows were there where they shouldn't be. Glimpses of people walking past only to turn and no one's there. Seeing one of my cousins walk into the barn and then walk in and they're nowhere to be found. However, one experience stands out above the rest. My cousin Kurt and I were playing in a corn trailer that was parked under one of the overhangs on the side of the barn one evening, right at dusk. And when we heard someone walking inside the old barn, we climbed out of the trailer to investigate. We walked in the door and stared into the darkness. Then we heard them outside. We turned on the lights and there was nobody there. But when we heard them outside, how could that be? There was only grass and ground. We were starting to get a little freaked out by them. We had to go back outside to turn out the lights. And when we reached up to turn out the lights, as we were still hearing the footsteps, as soon as we flipped off the switch, we were in total darkness and total silence. And we gingerly stepped out from under the overhang of the barn and began to run. We made it to the gate behind my grandparents' house, only about 50 or 60 feet, but we both inexplicably stopped and turned. No words were exchanged as we turned, but we both looked back to right where we had been. And there, in that corn trailer that we had only been playing in moments before, stood a figure. We could only see it from the waist up, but it was glowing. No features could be made out, but we knew it was staring at us. We were frozen in place. I'm not sure how long we stood there watching it while it was watching us. It couldn't have been more than just a few seconds, but without speaking, we both turned again at the same time and began running and didn't stop until we were at my house across the road. Now, many years later, I discovered a legend connected to that old church building. It went like this: 2 shots rang out as one, 2 pools of blood did run, then Dixon and Cain were done. Now, Jeremiah Dixon ravaged the citizens of South Mississippi and the Gulf Coast during the 1920s. Thievery, murder, kidnappings, you name it. Dixon was just an evil man and hated by everyone. Sheriff Baker Cain had been on his trail for several years, coming close to capturing him from time to time, but mostly hounding him enough that Dixon was looking for any opportunity to remove this thorn in his side called Sheriff Cain. Now, the sheriff was known as a praying man and usually spent his evenings at the newly established Refuge Church, kneeling at the altar down in front. The legend goes that one misty, foggy night in early June 1922, Sheriff Cain was at his usual spot at the altar when Dixon decided it was time to take vengeance on his nemesis. Dixon silently entered the back of the sanctuary, hoping to catch the sheriff off guard and assassinate him. But what he wasn't remembering was that Cain was also known for his lightning draw. Dixon began to silently walk toward the front with his gun extended. Sheriff Baker Cain moved like the wind just as Dixon fired. The 2 shots sounded as one, but both men were mortally wounded and fell to the floor simultaneously. Pools of blood appeared and shrouded both bodies. Now, after learning of this legend and having had my own experience, I decided I needed to see if they might be connected. So, in the early part of June this year, I returned to that old barn. I waited till dark, when the mist and fog were beginning to rise, and I approached the door. As I opened the door and slowly stepped inside, nothing seemed to be amiss. There had been no electricity for years, so I waited a few moments for my eyes to adjust to the darkness, mentally kicking myself for not having brought a flashlight. Nothing could be heard but the apprehensiveness of my breathing. As the night grew darker, I imagined that I could even begin to hear my own heartbeat. At some point, I began to hear the faint sound of footsteps getting closer and closer to the door that I had just come through moments before. I heard a slight squeak as the door moved minutely inward. My heart leapt into my throat and I went to cry out, but a chill wind came from the opposite direction and threw me against the wall. I hit hard and it knocked the wind out of me. I expected to slide down, but was held to the wall by some kind of unseen force. The wind began to howl and became even colder as it held me to the wall. I was having trouble breathing and started shivering as the temperature dropped even further. And then I saw them. A glowing figure kneeling at the other end of the small building, and another glowing figure creeping in the door with one arm extended, giving off waves of anger, hatred, and pure evil. It wasn't but a moment, and the first figure was spinning and raising his arm as well. It was then that I heard it. 2 shots rang out as one. Then 2 pools of blood began spreading on the floor. I must have blacked out at that point because it seemed that I awoke and was in darkness again. I was sitting on the floor. The wind had stopped and the warmth of the June night was creeping in again. I ran out as if they were chasing me, and I never looked back. So, what do you think? Is this legend true? Is that experience real? Did the 2 young boys really see a glowing man? And did the narrator actually see someone, 2 full-bodied apparitions in that old church? Well, that's for you to decide. Well, the tale is told, and we are done. Until the next dark night, we wish you safe and strange night treks. Good night.